Merhaba, hoş geldiniz. Merhaba herkese. Ne güzel hepinizi görmek. Bir yandan hocamızı bekliyoruz. Bir yandan sizi şöyle sessiz, hareketsiz, kısa bir oturuşa davet ediyorum. İsterseniz gözleriniz açık, ister kapalı. Ve hangi niyetle burada olduğumuzu hatırlayabiliriz. Dikkatinizi oturuşunuza getirebilirsiniz. Bu bedene, içinde bulunduğunuz bu mekana. Ve mekandaki varlığınıza dikkatinizi getirebilirsiniz. Ne muazzam bir şey. Kendi başımıza evimizde otururken bir yandan dünyanın her yerinden insanlarla bağ kurabiliyoruz aynı anda. Ne şanslıyız böyle bir devirde yaşadığımız için. İçeride bir şükran duygusu oluşuyor mu? Onca ızdıraba tanık olduğumuz yıkıma rağmen yine de böylesi fırsatlar da var. Birbirimizle bağ kurabiliyoruz. Ve nefesiniz nasıl? Ve işte belirsizliklerle dolu bir yaşam. Bir şeyler planlıyoruz ama çoğu kez planladığımız gibi gitmiyor. Her şey sürpriz, her şey yepyeni. Her an ilk kez gerçekleşiyor. Ve hangi niyetlerle buradasınız? Neyi arıyorsunuz? Hangi soruyu sormak istersiniz bu buluşmaya bu akşam? Hangi soruyu yanıtlamasını istersiniz? Bence bunu belirlemek şu an iyi bir fikir. İçimde bir türlü yanıt bulamadığım bir soru var ve onu arıyorum. Bu sorunun yanıtını arıyorum. Ve bir soru sorarak bir kitap okumak gibi. Ne aradığınızı bilirseniz, aradığınız şey karşınıza gelirse onu görebilirsiniz. Ama ne aradığımızı bilmezsek, aradığımız şey karşılaşsak bile gözden kaçabilir. Evet, kendi vaktinizde gözleriniz kapalıysa açın. Ve sanıyorum hocamız geldi. Hello.
Hi there.
Okay.
Some water.
Giriş yaparak tanıtmak isterim hızlıca vakit kaybetmeden. 2019'da MindLight okulunu kurdum ve eğitmen ekibimizle birlikte çalışıyoruz. Bu konuşmalar Dharma Talk adı altında başlatıyoruz. İlk olarak sevgili Roshi Joan Halifax'ı davet ettik bu Dharma Talk'larda. Bunlar tamamen insani sorumluluk projesi olarak yürüttüğümüz konuşmalar. Dolayısıyla çok teşekkür ediyoruz öğretmenimize. Ücretsiz olarak bu etkinliği yapmak için kabul etti bizim davetimizi. Kısaca Roshi Joan Halifax'ı anlatmak isterim size, katılımcılarımıza. Amerikalı Zen ustası ve antropolog, ekolojist, insan hakları aktivisti, ölüm eşlikçisi ve Budizm üzerine birçok kitabın yazarı kendisi. 90'lı yıllarda Santa Fe, New Mexico'da Upaya Zen Merkezi'ni kurdu ve meditasyon pratiğiyle sosyal eylemleri bütünleştirmeye ve bilgelik ve şefkati bir araya getirmeye odaklandı. Çok uzun yıllar, çok tecrübesi var. Yani 50 yıl boyunca ne demek benim yaşımdan büyük. Ölmeye yakın insanlara ölüm eşlikçiliği yaptı. 6 yıl boyunca New Mexico'da çok ağır koşullarda yaşayan cezaevinde idama mahkum edilmiş insanlarla, hükümlülerle gönüllü olarak çalıştı. Cinsiyet temelli şiddete son vermek için feminist hareketin içinde yer aldı ve bütün yaşamını Dharma çalışmalarıyla sosyal adaletsizliklere karşı aksiyona geçme arasında denge kurmaya adadı. Ve çok minnettarım bu konuşmaya kabul ettiği ve geldiği için ve hepinize de çok teşekkür ediyorum. Şimdi kısaca bu konuşmanın içeriğini açıklamak isterim. Ona yazdım ve gerçekten ülkemizde içinde bulunduğumuz bu çok zor koşullar içerisinde artık aklımızı kaçırma noktasına geldiğimizde benim en çok ihtiyacımdan ortaya çıktı bu konuşmalara, bu hocalarımızı davet etmek. Bilen birine sormak istedim. Hani nasıl yaptınız? Bunca dünya tarihinde tanık olduğunuz acı karşısında nasıl aklınızı ve kalbinizi koruyabildiniz? Bizim ülkemizde çocuğa, kadına şiddet tarihin en yüksek seviyelerinde. Sokak köpekleri toplu olarak öldürülüyor. Ülkenin toprakları tamamen talan ediliyor. Yangınlar ve depremler yetkililer önlem almadığı için insanları öldürüyor. Hükümet anayasayı çiğniyor. Seçilmiş belediye başkanımız hapise atılıyor. Öğrenciler hapse atılıyor. Farklı düşünen herkes mahkum ediliyor. Ve en özel hayatımızdaki seçimlerimize kadar müdahale ediliyor. Bunca yolsuzluk, ahlaki çöküş, ihlaller, şiddet vesaire bu büyük şiddet ve ızdırap karşısında nasıl aklımızı koruyacağız? Nasıl hala şefkatli kalabiliriz ve yine de ses çıkarmaya devam edebiliriz? Çünkü iki kutba ayrıldı son özellikle 1-2 aydır gerçekleşen 23 yılın en büyük ayaklanmaları sırasında spiritüel dünyada bir iki kutup oldu Türkiye'de. Bir her şeyi kabul eden ve sessiz kalanlar ve daha pasifist görenler bu spiritüel yaklaşımları onu da kabul et, onu da kalbine bas, şefkatle kucakla ama şefkat öyle bir şey değil. Bir de hayır hem şefkatli olarak hani nefret etmeden yaşayabilirim hem de ayağa kalkabilirim e, haklarımı korumak için diye ikiye ayrıldı. Benimkisi ikinci yol ve sevgili Joan Halifax'ınki de hem Budist pratikleri 50 yıldır uyguluyor hem bir aktivist. O yüzden ilk böyle bir soruyla başlamak istedim. Nasıl aklımızı ve kalbimizi koruyabiliriz bu ızdırap dolu dünyada diyeyim aslında Türkiye'den ziyade. Siz nasıl yaptınız? Bize nasıl yol gösterebilirsiniz?
So, hello, everybody. I'm very happy to be here. Again, I'm grateful that you stepped in, Gunsu, and I want to ask, am I being simultaneously translated or sequentially translated?
Simultaneously.
Wow. Okay. So I just want to begin this talk with great thanks to my teachers, Thich Nhat Hanh and Roshi Bernie Glassman. You know, Ty and Bernie were Zen teachers They were so dedicated to the practice of socially engaged Buddhism, and they're gone now. But their extraordinary and courageous approach to Buddhism, in fact, has touched the lives of people all over the world. You know, in the mid 1960s, a young Vietnamese monk came to America to ask us to cease bombing his country. And when I encountered Thich Nhat Hanh in New York at that time, I realized three really important things. I too was suffering. I was suffering from moral outrage. The second thing was that I could be a social activist and a contemplative. And the third thing was that the teachings of the Buddha made pragmatic sense as a path out of personal, social, and environmental suffering. And as I began to explore the history of the Buddha himself, I recognized that the Buddha did not hold himself apart from the social suffering of his time. And I think this is really important for us to note. It's my view, many of us who are socially engaged Buddhists, this is our view, but not all consider the life of the Buddha being a life that was deeply rooted in social transformation. But we know that the Buddha engaged in revolutionary acts of compassion. For example, he flattened out the racist caste system in his community. He ordained untouchables. He ordained women. He sat with the dying. He ordained a serial killer who had gone through a powerful experience of transformation, and so much more. We can understand now that the roots of the Bodhisattva ideal are deep in the earth of early Buddhism. They're deep in the history of the Buddha himself. The term bodhisattva in early Buddhism refers to the Buddha in previous lifetimes, but also it refers to the Buddha as a young person in his last life when he was moving toward awakening. And I don't know if you've read any of the Jataka tales of early Buddhism, but here it's a powerful incubator for the later Mahayana unfolding of the Bodhisattva ideal. And I'm sharing this because I think it's important to understand that within the great tradition of Buddhism, there are threads that it's important for us who are Buddhist practitioners, no matter what our tradition is, to reflect on the early tradition, the life of the Buddha, the Jataka tales, the Bodhisattva ideal as exemplified in the teachings of the Paramitas. And of course, in the Mahayana tradition, generally it's the 10 paramitas of generosity, integrity, patience, wholeheartedness, concentration, and wisdom. Now, there are some interesting aspects of the Bodhisattva ideal that I think are really important for us to explore, particularly since your community is involved in social engagement, in addressing issues of social challenges, and I presume environmental challenges within the context of your nation. And so I'm hoping to touch into those because I think it gives us some ground on which we can allow the seeds that we're incubating as social activists, we're watering those seeds so that we can move together in greater solidarity in shifting the narrative that is now afflicting democracy in many countries, including my own. We're also in a polycrisis. It's not just authoritarianism. It's not just fascism. We are in the midst of an environmental catastrophe. I know that the fires in Turkey have affected the lives of many people. Also, I live in New Mexico. We had no winter here, and we're anticipating that our forests will be subject to great fires in this summer season. We also know that the environmental crisis is pushing people out of the southern hemispheres in the Americas and also in the European context. As you see people fleeing not only sectarian violence and religious violence, but also fleeing from the extreme stressors of what's happening in terms of the climate. And we also know that it is essential for us to recognize the role of our economic systems, which are driven by corporate greed, and the effect of these mega corporations on people all down the line, from the very poorest to the working class and the middle class. So, as we know it today, the Bodhisattva ideal emerged during the Mahayana movement in the 1st century before the Common Era, when monks and nuns and lay followers began to devote themselves to the Bodhisattva path, a path that's open to everyone, lay people, monks, women, men, non-binary, even the power of the funeral yesterday of Pope Francis, bringing poor people, the unsheltered, and also BIPOC, people of color, and also people who are transsexual, and so on. This equity between all individuals, which is one of the important principles of the Bodhisattva ideal, which is to care for all beings equally. And the Bodhisattva path is open to everyone. It is radically inclusive. It focuses on awakening for the sake of all beings, for the sake of not just human beings, of our forests, of our atmosphere, and so forth. And today in the modern Mahayana Buddhism schools, which are, in many parts of the world, most of these schools deeply encourage this cultivation of an altruistic motivation, and how important it is to actually receive the vows of the bodhisattvas. And, with these vows, one fundamentally commits to work for the awakening of all beings by embodying the paramitas, which are, of course, the very ground of the bodhisattva attitude. Now, my good friend, Roshi Norman Fisher, has shared that this bodhisattva ideal, what he calls the bodhisattva attitude, and he says it's an unshakable attitude of clarity that reflects our very character. I mean, this is our stance. It's our point of view. I mean, it's the internal atmosphere, writes Norman, that colors our way of seeing the world. It's an attitude from the point of view of our work here at the Zen Center that is completely saturated by, and I'm going to use a Sanskrit term, by appamada, And appamada is generally translated as heedfulness or as vigilance. But I like how Stephen Batchelor translates it. He uses the word care in translating appamada. And we add two other words, and that is conscientiousness and compassion. Care, conscientiousness, compassion, coloring our internal atmosphere, being values in one way, and in another way, being how we operationalize those values in a world that is so fragmented. So, as a person who's been in this work for so many decades, I'm approaching my 83rd birthday. And, I never anticipated when I was in my 20s and turned toward Buddhism that I would actually be facing the kind of world that we're facing today. And so, in looking at the Bodhisattva ideal and the Bodhisattva attitude, there were some other things that came up for me as a social activist and an environmental activist that I kind of wanted to explore in my encounter with you, because I think these could be helpful for you. They've been helpful for my community as we begin to take action, in a world that is so challenged right now. So the first one is, I hope I have time to share all 7. I might not, but I'm going to try. But the first one is, this commitment to foster interconnected communities of integrity and care. And it's to understand that this is about inclusion, it's about interbeing, it's about solidarity, and it's about moral character. So let me give you those 4 again: inclusion, interbeing, solidarity, and moral character. And I say interconnected communities of care because, one insular community can become a cult, and as such can be a real danger to society, that we need to work with others across boundaries at this time to actualize an approach to our work as social activists that is characterized by fundamental solidarity, bringing many different kinds of people together in order to address the social ills that are very present in your country and also my country. Now, I have this wonderful friend, Molly Crockett at Princeton University, who's done some very interesting research in the area of cognitive science and social psychology. And this was actually around the pandemic. And what she discovered in the research that they were engaged in is that an approach to caring and morality that is not self-centered, but that actually involves impartial, a benefit for all, what we would call care. In other words, everyone has to benefit. That what she discovered, which I think was really fascinating, is that people overwhelmingly preferred leaders who took a non-biased approach to solving the terrible problems in the pandemic and of sharing resources around the world wherever they were needed most, rather than hoarding resources for their home country. And I'm remembering this saying or this value in various African countries of Ubuntu. You are because I am, or I am because you are. And another way I say this is that we rise through lifting each other up. We rise through lifting each other up. And there's a koan that reflects this view. It's from a Rinzai monk in the 10th century China. He says, you know, a monk asked him, Shushan, he says, what's a bodhisattva before she becomes a Buddha? And this great teacher replied, Shushan replied, he said, all beings. And then the monk said, well, after she becomes a Buddha. And then Shushan said, all beings. All beings. And I think what we're hearing here, you know, is an early version of Thich Nhat Hanh's view of interbeing being expressed in this koan. We're not separate from any being or thing. And that's also what my teacher, Roshi Bernie Glassman, talked about, you know, in terms of one body. You know, that the bodhisattva lives that realization. And it's not to objectify others, it's to actually understand we have to include others, including the sea pirate, as Thich Nhat Hanh said in his powerful poem, Please Call Me by My True Names, into the circle of our understanding and dedicate ourselves to working with the differences. Also holding, you know, beings accountable. Yes, one of the things that I want to say, I'm so appreciative that I'm able to speak with you all in Turkey at this moment. But what is happening through our digital media is that in a certain way, our embodied experience of the commons that is coming together in an embodied way in place and in space. Much as, you know, my own community just came out of an intensive practice period where many people are in our Zendo over 30 days doing practice and working together. And that I just encourage, you know, you all over there on the other side of the world to understand the value, not only the incredible opportunity we have to actually meet each other virtually, but also to understand that the isolation that we experience in this medium makes it challenging for us to actually weave democracy. Democracy is woven through the medium of community. It is woven in the commons that we share, the common spaces. So, you know, instead of staying home watching a film on Netflix, it's actually going out and go to a movie theater. Or instead of ordering from Amazon, it's going out and meeting the world, and so forth. So many different examples, including the virtual office or the virtual meditation hall, which of course we're very actively involved with, but it cannot supplant the power of weaving democracy that happens in space, in place, in our lived warm hand to warm hand experience. So make community wherever you are and reach out to other communities as well. So essential. Another extraordinary power that the Bodhisattva exemplifies, but that is not, so much in the literature of the Bodhisattva, is not maybe so well understood. It's that of wise hope. Conventional hope is looking for an outcome, but actually wise hope is selfless, it's non-transactional, it's not attached to outcomes. I remember years ago, I read a piece by Václav Havel, the great Czech statesman, and he said, hope is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense regardless of how it turns out. Let me read that again, okay? Hope is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense regardless of how it turns out. Friends, what we do matters. Even though how it matters or when it matters, who or what it may impact, we might not know. But we do things as socially engaged Buddhists because they make sense. They're congruent with this experience of compassion, of benefiting others. I mean, our actions, how we live, what we care about, what we care for, how we care really do matter, no matter the outcome. And that's hard for transactional people who are Western educated, who are always going for an outcome. And I really love Zen Master Ma. He said, benefit what cannot be benefited. Do what can't be done. In other words, don't let the magnitude of the problem turn you away from meeting the problem. We have to really engage with the impossible without any attachment to outcome. Can we do that? I hope so. I really hope so. So I want to talk about this third piece. And that is that the Bodhisattva is at home in the midst of radical uncertainty. Our experience, our lived experience, fundamentally is characterized by precariousness. We don't know what is going to happen in the next moment. And Suzuki Roshi talked about beginner's mind, Roshi Burney, Glassman, about not knowing. It's an invitation for us to live in this kind of fundamental openness, knowing that the truth of surprise, of impermanence, of change will prevail no matter what. And that we have the flexibility, the resilience, the imagination, the curiosity to really live in not knowing, to really live in not knowing, to survive, to actually thrive in the midst of uncertainty. Now, there's another one. Bodhisattvas don't seek easy situations, and they live without fear. I mean, this practice is about what we call charnel ground practice. It's going to where the suffering is greatest. Whether it's the operating theater, whether it's the war zone, whether it's the prison, whether it's the immigrants' camp on the coast of Turkey, bodhisattvas go to those places where heartbreak, where suffering is most intense, where life itself is truly precarious, whether it's the surgeon's cold theater or the hot theater of war. And bodhisattvas come alive in the death camps. And they see the light under the bridges where the unsheltered huddle to escape the rains. Bodhisattvas do not seek easy situations. That's pretty scary, but that is our work. And it's not to re-traumatize ourselves at all. We have to know our capacity. You know, I was in a Dharamsala meeting moderating a science exchange between His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And again, His Holiness emphasized that we're one human community and how important it is for us not to be actualizing anger, which is really coming from our sense of helplessness, but to bring forth, to come from that place within ourselves that is warm-hearted. And that is the real cure for despair, for futility. This cultivation of an altruistic heart. And it's why we keep returning to practice again and again and cultivating bodhicitta, this aspiration to awaken in order to really be of benefit to others. You know, I was thinking about His Holiness and what he has experienced in his lifetime of fleeing his country when he was a young person. Thinking about Nelson Mandela and his years of imprisonment, Robben Island in South Africa. Thinking about Malala taking a bullet to the head, working for the education of girls in Afghanistan. All of them and so many more. Greta Thunberg. Their way out of social oppression, their way out of loss, was on the path of deeply caring for others by not turning away from suffering, but putting their arms bravely around the truth of suffering. And with that, I want to turn toward compassion. Of course, compassion, this quality that is at the heart of the Bodhisattva ideal. And it's to understand that compassion is not a kind of top-down process. It's fundamentally about a spontaneous, seamless, unprescribed responsiveness to the truth of suffering as suffering presents itself in the present moment. It's not pity. It's not consolation. It's not a recipe. It's that capacity of ours to actually bring our attention in an unwavering way to suffering as it is before us, and to remember who we really are, and to be in connection, attunement with that situation before us and also with ourselves in order to see deeply into suffering, and from that respond to that suffering in an aligned way, a way that is congruent with the circumstances. Compassion. You know, I'll tell you just a story that's just happened to me on Sunday. I was in a board meeting on the West Coast of the United States, and I was very, very tired from work, and also there were some issues that I was dealing with in the center, and it was quite a stressful time. And early in the morning on Sunday morning, last Sunday morning, I had an event that affected I had a heart situation, atrial fib, AFib, where my heart was beating very fast and irregularly. And really, I finally got it calmed down. And then I had to go back to the board meeting. Then I had to get on a plane. And I managed to change the plane reservation so that my change of planes going from the landing from the flight in San Francisco to on the way to Santa Fe in Denver. It was a long walk. I was worried about my heart. So I went on an earlier flight, and I just got the very last seat on that flight. I was just like in the middle seat. And the person to my right was a stewardess. And the person to my left seemed like a kind of quiet Asian middle-aged man. And I was just kind of squeezed in the middle, very, not really feeling very well. And we landed in Denver, and I put my backpack on. I kind of staggered out of the plane, and I realized that my shoelace was untied on my left shoe. And I thought, well, just let me just get down the concourse. And the first thing I knew when I turned right to begin the walk down the concourse is someone leaped in front of me. It was the man sitting next to me, looked at me with these incredibly kind eyes and said, "Please let me tie your shoes for you." And I will tell you, I thought I would burst into tears. I mean, it was just this moment of incredible compassion on his part for a stranger. I said, "Oh, no, no, no, I'll do it. I'll do it." And I pulled off my pack, and I leaned down and tied my shoelaces. And he kind of sheltered me. He knew I was having a hard day. And I stood up and thanked him. And I realized I had just met a stranger who cared about somebody they didn't know, but saw them as vulnerable and was right there for them. Compassion can be expressed in so many ways, in small or great acts, but it's not a performance. It's a spontaneous meeting and response to the presence of suffering, to the presence of difficulties. So it's a little personal story that just happened in my life that really kind of surprised me, but I wanted to share it. Because sometimes we feel like, the Bodhisattva vows, creations are numberless. I vow to save them all. It's like, oh my goodness. The assignment feels overwhelming. And yet, it's those small gestures that actually change our lives as well as the life of maybe just one other. Compassion. So, another power of great importance is joy. And we could call it revolutionary joy. And my friend Rebecca Solnit wrote that, joy doesn't betray, but it actually sustains activism. And when you face a politics that aspires to make you fearful, alienated, and isolated, joy is a fine initial act of insurrection. I just cannot underline enough how important revolutionary joy is for us activists. I mean, it was also so characteristic in the 1960s of the civil rights and the anti-war movement, of which I was a part. It was the music. It was getting together as, small and large groups. Yes, awful things were happening, but also we made joy together. I just was on the mall in Washington, D.C., for the big demonstration against the Trump administration. There were 100,000 people on the mall. It was just incredible. And it was like, the sort of summer of love. There were marching bands, there were drumming things, there were performances, there were signs. I mean, in the midst of this mess that we're in this country, there was so much power and so much joy. Because honestly, just having this kind of heavy, dark cloud of oppression following us around, we will lose energy and not be able to face the magnitude of difficulties that we are in at this time in our planet. And as Rebecca said, joy is a fine initial act of insurrection. Nothing makes an oppressor more angry or more disempowered than to meet joy in the presence of those who are oppressed but no longer, or those who are pushing for social change. Revolutionary joy. And this power is about, in one way, what the social psychologist Dacher Keltner calls joy that arises from moral beauty. When you engage in acts of compassion, it inspires other, it uplifts other, it primes moral beauty. When joy breaks out, or art is created in the midst of the hell of oppression, beauty is created and moral beauty is created. The sense of uplift, of congruence, of possibility. And this comes out of unself-conscious acts of virtue that literally inspire awe in others. Bodhisattvas experience joy in the happiness of others and in the good fortune of others. And we know it's called mudita. But also they don't reject suffering. I mean, their deep character is flavored throughout by this sense of happiness, of joy, of possibility. So I just wanted to, infuse, since many of us feel victimized, or many people feel victimized or oppressed or hopeless, one of the things that we really want to do as social activists is gin up, create, foster, bring about joy as we move forward in this very complicated world that we're in. I mean, again, bringing in another writer into the conversation, we have a great writer, conservationist, environmental activist named Terry Tempest Williams. And she says, can we remake our vows to not only find beauty in a broken world, but create beauty in the world we find? And I think, when my heart turns to Gaza, of images I've received of, Gazans making beautiful food in the midst of rubble, making beauty in the world we find. So I've shared 6. I'm going to share now 7. I hope I'm okay for time, but the 7th great quality of the Bodhisattva is that of imagination. It's about the generosity of mind that is absolutely free from narrow views. And then I remember a koan where Bajang asked, about the gateway to the Bodhisattva path. And he said, it's generosity. It's the practice of letting go. And the monk asked Bajang, well, what do you let go of? And he said, let go of narrow views. You let go of the ideas that are small and tight, graspable and possessible. And you do this through imagination, not the dread part of imagination, but imagination that is characterized by this sense of natural abundance. I remember my own teacher, Bernie Glassman, Roshi. He really had the Bodhisattva attitude. And his whole life, as a Jewish person, he was dedicated, and this is the term, Hebrew term, so it's such a beautiful term, tikkun olam. And this is this project that all of us have of repairing the brokenness in the world, including our own brokenness, and not letting brokenness stop us. In fact, as I said in charnel ground practice, going exactly to where there is brokenness, because you have imagined where brokenness is repaired. Going to your nation's capital, going to the politicians who have adopted an authoritarian process. I think imagination is so important now. It's not about the nightmare of the worst is yet to come. It's having the imagination that's born from being open to the best and the wildest of all possibilities, and opening to the heart and mind that is fundamentally generous, full of potential, and empty of fear. So I hope I've conveyed in my simple way some thoughts that can support the work that you're doing as social activists. And I'd like to open now what we're doing to any questions, whatever questions that you have. I don't care how difficult. I'm always interested in difficult questions. So please.
Evet, kısa bir zamanımız var. Günsu'nun açılış konuşmasına umarım şahit oldunuz hepiniz. Aslında bu formları doldururken topladığımız sorularda çok ortak noktalar gördük. Günsu'nun konuşmasıyla ve bugün burada olmamızın sebebiyle eşleşen. O yüzden daha bugünün konusuna ve gündemine burada toplanmamıza uygun olan kısa ve net sorularınızı sorabilirseniz kısaca rica edeceğiz ki olabildiğince Halifax sizleri yanıtlasın. El kaldırın lütfen aşağıdaki emojileri kullanarak. Böylelikle soru isteğine göre, sıraya göre sorularınızı alalım ve söz verelim.
Merhaba. Elimizde olanlar ve olmayanlar, değiştirebileceğimiz şeylerle ilgili, değiştiremeyeceğimiz şeylerle. Şöyle bugünle bağlantılı olarak soracak olursam, hocamız zaten aslında bize konuşma içinde bahsetti yöntemleri ama e, bugün bu yaşadığımız sıkıntılı, üzüntülü durumlar elimizde olmayan, yani bizim değiştiremeyeceğimiz şeyler. Bunlar karşısında tavrımızı hani çok kısa bir şekilde daha e, bir iki tavsiye olabilir mi?
You know, I'm not so sure I believe that
Teşekkürler.
we cannot change things. But in any case, when I'm encountering a very stuck situation, I always ask this question: what am I learning here? What is this situation teaching me? It's a kind of way that I can connect, not with the force of my ego, but really with this kind of open-heartedness, this sort of open mind, you know, kind of spirit of humility. What am I learning here? What do I need to learn from this situation? You know, I have worked on death row in the prison system in my country. I have worked with dying people for over a half a century in situations, needless to say, that were desolate. I've gone to, you know, been a part of massive protests against our government and against corporations, where you think nothing good will come of this. But, you know, as Václav Havel says, just because it makes sense, you do it, even though you're not able to get the outcome that you want. But for you, your integrity is preserved. Excuse me. Hello? Your integrity is preserved. Understand. And also, you're learning all the time. And you get to see your ego wanting something or immediate gratification. And you learn the value of patience, even though things aren't moving as fast as you'd like them to. Anyway, I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Gülten Hanım, lütfen siz sorun.
Hi, Joan. The main issue, I guess, nowadays is to keep the hope high, is to keep it sustainable, because sometimes it seems so desperate and so painful. So it's not easy to keep the hope high. What could you suggest on this issue?
Yeah. You know, I've written a lot about, as is my good friend Rebecca Solnit, about hope. And to go back to Václav Havel once again, you show up because it's the right thing to do. You know, working with dying people was so important for me because I just saw, as much as I wanted a good death for everybody, not everybody was going to have one of those. And yet I still showed up with the same amount of attention and care and hope, wise hope, knowing I couldn't control the outcome, but I could be present for whatever was unfolding and be of support. But another thing has to do with our relationships. I spend time with happy people to the extent that I can. Honestly, being with too many people who are worrying and down about everything, it kind of gets me down. And I don't want to be the only joyful person in the room. So I am very careful to actually have relationships that are wholesome and fun and joyful and collaborative and generative.
Thank
You've got to water the seeds of joy.
Evet, sonraki soruyu alabilir miyiz? Zeynep sanıyorum. Zeynep Ekizoğlu.
Evet, merhabalar. Öncelikle değerli vaktini ayırdığı için çok teşekkür ederiz Joan Hoca'ya. Ben de kendim bir yoga hocasıyım. Ee, Şefkatle ilgili en çok zorlandığım şey bence hani iç kalbinde biraz merhamet olan herkesin sevdiğine, tanıdığı birine, hatta yardıma ihtiyacı olan birine şefkat gösterebilmesi. Kalbinde merhamet varsa kolay. Ama ee, şefkat gösterdiğiniz birinden zarar gördükten sonra tekrar o insana şefkat göstermek, orada ipler kopuyor. Yani burada hocamızın bize
Well,
m, tavsiyesi ne olur? Hani kendi
yeah.
yoga öğretisinden de kendi felsefemden de en çok aşamadığım nokta bu. Tecrübelerini ve görüşlerini paylaşırsa çok sevinirim.
It's such a great question, and thank you for answering it. I think giving compassion or being compassionate with people that we like or who are suffering from things that are sympathetic to us is wonderful. But compassion doesn't discriminate. Compassion toward, for example, the president of my country, Donald Trump. The state of mind that Donald Trump is in is wretched. It's a horrible state of mind. I wouldn't want anybody to experience it. It's suffering. Netanyahu causing this genocide or, engaging in genocide in Gaza. The mind of Netanyahu is also suffering. It's horrendous. It's not to say we shouldn't hold Netanyahu or Trump accountable, but it's to understand these toxic states of mind are also suffering. And you begin to shift out of this objectification, othering. You begin, going back to Thich Nhat Hanh's poem, to understand the suffering of the sea pirate who's raping the little girl on the boat escaping from the war in Vietnam. You begin to understand that state of mind is suffering, and there are roots to that suffering. And then when I was working on death row and maximum security in the prison system, I only worked with murderers. I mean, because I worked on death row and maximum security. And I really understood so much more about the source of their suffering, the hatred that they had, as I began to bear witness to their stories. I don't know if you've ever looked at a photograph of Donald Trump's father or of Hitler, Adolf Hitler's father. You think, oh my God. Oh, what kind of household of cruelty and violence must that have been? And again, it is not sympathy. It's not condolence. It's not pity. Compassion is, in a way, ruthless. It sees clearly and it responds in a way, not to pet Donald Trump on the head, the president of my country, or Netanyahu in Israel. They want to be free of suffering, and that's what you hope for them. And maybe in some way you can help that happen or not. Do you kind of get what I'm saying? In other words, you can vilify the abuser, but also the states of mind that give rise to a person abusing nature, or a woman, or a child, or a friend. Those states of mind are wretched, and that too is suffering. Hard to do. I'm still working on it. But I have a little peek into what compassion is. And I've managed a little bit to let go of shaming and blaming. But also, I hold people accountable for their actions and their decisions. That's love.
Çok teşekkürler sorunun cevabı için ve
Teşekkür ederim.
bir kişiye daha soru sorma şansı tanımak istiyoruz. Yine sıradan gideceğiz. Vakti bu şekilde kullandık ve sorunu Türkçe sorabilirsen memnun olurum Ecem. Böylelikle kanal değiştirmeden herkes duyabilir. Ecem sen de sor.
İngilizce sormayı tercih ederdim aslında ama tamam pekala. Öfkeden aslında bahsetmek istiyordum. Öfkenin çözümü olmadığını biliyoruz. Öfke duygusuyla yaşamak zorunda olduğumuzu biliyoruz. Fakat bu öfkeyi herhangi bir şeye dönüştürme zorunluluğumuz var mı? Mücadele etmeye, yeni bir yaşam modeli inşa etmeye ararken öfkemizi itici güç olarak mı kullanmalıyız? Yoksa onu heybemizden atmamız mı gerekir? Teşekkür ederim.
Oh, such a great question. Thank you so much. You know, again, I'll go back to the work that I did in the prison system. You know, the prison that we have here is a kind of anger machine. It's, you know, the men who are incarcerated are angry, and the people who are taking care of them, the correctional officers, are angry. It's really tough. I was inside working for 6 years. I learned a lot about anger. And one of the most important lessons I learned was that those who are angry feel helpless. If you look at your own anger and you look deeply, you realize helplessness is a big component of it. Now, can anger have clarity in it? Yes. When you peel the story away of injustice, for example, and you rest just with the pure energy, then a kind of clarity is there that allows you to see things more in higher resolution. And the energy is the energy that can give rise to protest, to acts of transformation, to healing, and more. So it's not throwing anger away, because you can't throw things away. It's not like that. You know, maybe I can cut my ear off and I can still, you know, operate in the world. But the truth is that whatever arises within our consciousness, including anger, is there to teach us. And we are learning from it. And we don't want to actually water the seeds of anger in others, because it just ramps up like that. So use anger well, learn from it, look deeply, and do not harm others, if at all possible. And I'm a very passionate person. I know anger personally. And it has been a study for me and a practice for me to understand that my anger as a woman has come in part of having been born in a woman's body and having faced gender discrimination my whole life, including in my 9th decade. And I will not bridge the gap effectively by blaming men, but by working with them, holding up the mirror, but doing so intelligently, wisely, joyfully, in a way that the objects of my anger can learn, and I can learn as well. You know, we're almost at our time. I just want to say it's a great joy and honor to be together. I thank you for patience with me. As I said, I had the hour wrong. And so many beautiful people online, and I wanted to hear more about your stories. I know mine. So one day I hope our paths cross again. And I hope we can meet in a more peaceful world. And I hope we can work together to make that happen. Thank you.
Çok çok teşekkür ederiz. Onur duyuyoruz sizi burada ağırladığımız için ve bize zamanınızı ayırdığınız için. Anlıyoruz ki hala şefkatli kalmaya devam edebiliriz, kapsayıcı olabiliriz. Ama aynı zamanda haklarımız için ses çıkarmaya da devam edebiliriz. Bu pasiflik demek değil. Ve sizden de bu cesareti aldık, bu motivasyonu aldık. Aynı tutkuyu, ateşli tutkuyu hissediyoruz Türkiye halkı olarak. Çok teşekkürler bizim yanımızda olduğunuz için.
Thank you.
Herkese çok teşekkür ederiz katıldıkları için. İsterseniz ses açıp güle güle diyebilirsiniz. Sizin hepinizin sesini duymak çok güzel
Çok
olur.
çok teşekkürler.
Çok
İnanılmaz
teşekkür
inandım.
ediyorum.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
So much.
Teşekkür ederim.
Teşekkür ederim.
Hoşçakalın.
Size de çok
Teşekkürler.
Çok teşekkürler aracı olduğunuz için.
çok
teşekkürler.
teşekkürler.
Çok sağ olun.
Çok teşekkürler. Teşekkürler.
Çok teşekkürler. İyi ki varsınız.
Sevgili Güz, teşekkür ederim.
Ben teşekkür ederim.
Elinize sağlık, hoşça kalın.